For those people who don't know me, my background, I spent 30 years as a teacher of science in grades 7 to 12 in Gambo. I can truly say that I enjoyed my job, and when I retired, I was pleased with the fact that I did retire. And today I look back down over this crowd and I'm thinking, wow, after 10 years we got another captivating audience. So hopefully I'll be able to entertain you. I said to my wife, I better take my pocket watch that my girls gave me and hopefully make sure that I don't talk on and on and on, because she often got to remind me. That's enough of that now. Here we go. Okay, I've entitled this presentation, Where Once They Logged. That's following on the theme that we started back in 2016, where we used the term, Where Once They Served. Then we followed in 2018, Where Once They Sailed. And now this one, Where Once They Logged. Certainly when Bob commented about the treatment of the forestry, I was eager to get at this project, because this was one where I felt these men didn't get treated fairly when they signed up and came back. They thought they were entitled perhaps to a little bit more, but had to fight for a period of time before they received these benefits. Here we go. I took some of the photographs that people sent me and I colored them. Not that, I wanted to change them, but just to give us a little bit of background. Sometimes you can see the face a little bit clearer. And there's a group of boys from here in Cove. And if you look at their coats, they're proudly displaying a badge that identified them, the forestry badge. Now, Haley's song was entitled, Everyone's Got a Story. I met with Haley for probably an hour or two on a couple of occasions, and every time I'd be talking to her, I used to say to her, everyone's got a story. And she caught that phrase and went home and pinned it in a song, and for that I'm very appreciative, because I truly believe every single person who went overseas has got a story. We just have to determine what is their story. As already been mentioned, the first announcement on the Overseas Forestry Unit came on November the 17th, when a radio announcement by the Commissioner of Natural Resources issued that in the radio. It was followed the following day when the government passed the Overseas Forestry Unit Act. Now that gave them the power to start recruiting people for the overseas. The Daily Express, November 21st, 1939, carried this particular ad. If you look at it, you see that they're about to recruit 2,000 lumber men to serve in Britain. And at the bottom, you see some of the conditions. That is, if you enlist with us, this is what you will receive. You had to be between the ages of 15 and 50. Some of you are wondering, what did these men sign? How did they enlist? What was their contract like? And this is a typical page that they would have signed in order to enlist. I want you to zero in on the bottom portion. This is an application by Elliot Stringer when he enlisted, and he leaves so much money to his dad at home every single month. It would have been deducted from his pay. And that was to assure the families back home would have pay. And that was all men had to sign that particular portion. I don't know if all of them had to take the same amount, but the point was money had to be left to the boys back home, the families. If you go researching the Newfoundland Overseas Forestry Unit for the Second World War, there's not much literature out there. This is probably the best book. It was written by Tom Curran, entitled They Also Served. And if you look at the bottom portion, it covered the forestry mostly in 1939, 1940, and so on. Using that book, this was one of the first charts that I put together, and it's a draft copy, it's not completed yet, but it shows the 5 boats that went overseas at the beginning up till about mid-February. And if you have your dad's, your granddad's number in mind, if you look at the numbers there in red, that would probably tell you what boat he was on. The first contingent, the first draft to go overseas, left in December 1939. They went over on a boat called the Antonia. On board the boat were 300 men, and this is what they were tasked with. When you get over there, you guys have to start building logging camps, because coming behind you is another 2,000 men. So you can see quite the task. On board that ship, we had 4 people from our area. There was Herbert Green, St. John's split out. He got on the train in Corner Brook. He was working in the lumber woods. He boarded the train in Corner Brook, went to St. John's. He was joined in Deer Lake by Josiah Drover from Hodgesco, and they met up possibly in St. John's with Helmut Goolby from Queen's Cove and William Soper from what was called in Black Brook, or today Northwest Brook. So these are the 4 first individuals to go overseas from our area. Then another vessel I want to mention, the Trophy. Now she's much more of a luxury type liner. And on board that particular sailing was the 4th draft from our area. It was the largest group. There was 963 men aboard that vessel from Newfoundland. They sailed on January 23rd, 1940. And from that sailing, there was 40 men from our area. So this was the largest group to leave the Southwest Arm area. Again, think about the numbers that range between 1,016, 1,979. You can identify your dad in that number. I can assure you he was on that boat. Unfortunately, this boat came under attack on May 14th, and it was sunk by the Germans, badly damaged, and the Allies had to finish sinking it. Most of the people on board survived, or a large percentage of them, but the vessel became an hazard, so the Allies had to sink it. Now, one of the things I've done the last probably year is comb through British newspapers. Thanks to the internet, didn't get the chance to travel over Britain, but it's much faster these days with the internet. Came across this article, and it talks about the arrival of the first 300 that went over. So there's confirmation that the boys arrived over in Scotland. Another article confirms the 963, they just rounded off to 1,000. So we now have that 1,000 plus 1,200 had already arrived over, for a total of 2,200 foresters in Scotland and that New England. Now, I want to speak about the second run by the Antonia. Remember I mentioned she was the first one? Here's the second run that she made. Here's the vessel. She made the run in July of 1940 from Bachwood. And right away, some of you here should say, yeah, Dad was on that. It reached the Firth of Clyde on July 13th. 205 loggers that were on board. 17 from this area. So again, a fairly large number. Now, as for the rest of the boys in our area, they were scattered 2, 3, 5, that type of thing on various other vessels. Now, the loggers that we're talking about in that previous slide, most of these loggers left by train from the Northern Bight train station. Now, thanks to a lady that's sitting in the audience right now by the name of Glenda Stoyles, we now have, and Wanda knows only too well, our committee, we spent years trying to find a photograph. Glenda sent us this photograph, and some of you might look at that and say, wow, I remember that place. So 17 of our loggers gathered up by the Northern Bight train station, got on board, and went to Bachwood, then from there sailed overseas. I want to take you on a logger's life. Now, the boys are over there. What do they do? Well, first 300, we know what they did. They started building camps. And they were charged with building these camps equip them, put the food in place, because the boys are coming. Here we see an article from the British newspaper confirming this, and in particular I want you to notice the subheading there where it says lumberjacks build 6 in 12 days. So the boys were putting up a few camps. And these camps, of course, made up a campsite, then we went on and built another campsite until everybody was ready to be accommodated there. Now, someone mentioned about, I think it was Bob, yes, you mentioned about the Scottish camps. Now, these were spread over Scotland, and where were they actually located? Here's a map of Scotland, and the numbers that you see with circles in them would have been the locations. Now, I've drawn a red circle around an area called Inverness and Cartridge. That's where a large percentage of the loggers from this area went. So, the number you're sitting here, that's where your dad went. That's where your granddad went. That's where your uncle went. Mostly in that region. These are the list of the camps. And again, I'm not going to go down through all of these. But again, going back to the book that Tom Hearn wrote, you could get that information from that. Okay, what were the camps like? Now, boys, here it is. Nice hotel that they had. Remember that, here a short period of time. Another campsite. Another campsite. This one here sort of reminds us of home, a bit of snow in that, down at the base of the cliff there. But see the logs up in the background, or the trees, and see how one area is already harvested. Now, here's a group of loggers from our area. I colored it again so that you could see it much clearer. So people sitting here, you can look up there and say, wow, that's Dad, that's Granddad. Thanks to these photographs surviving, thanks to all the people sitting here that were willing to share this information. This is another campsite with a group of men, just to illustrate that there wasn't only one man in a campsite. There was huge numbers of them. Now, Bob referred to the basic tools. Okay, I'm a logger, I'm getting ready to go. What do I need? Well, we all know you need an axe, you need a buck saw, and the PV pole. Here we see 2 people from our area, Max Pinson on your left, Max Peddle on your right, and the boys are proudly displaying not guns, right? Not guns, but what they needed to cut the forest. The buck saw and the axe. Here we see 3 individuals from the Clarnville area, again illustrating buck saw, axe. Now, PV pole, I wondered, okay, what was it? That's, but these logs, someone mentioned already, Bob, with the length of them, just imagine, you had to roll these things around, so you didn't pick them up and say, okay, I'll carry that over. Right? You had to roll them. So the PV pole became a very important tool. So that's your 3 basic tools that these men would have been supplied with in order to carry out their activity. Now, I'm going to diverge for a second. I had the pleasures of meeting this man when I retired, Alstad Goss. He served in the Second World War. And Alstad and myself, we had a couple of good yarns. I wish I had time to yarn more with him. But I want to look at what he responded to me when I asked him the question. Alstad, when you went in the woods, when you was a young person, what did you need? And this is the way he put it to me. Back then, you didn't have a power saw. You had a 36-inch Sandvakian buck saw and an axe. And I said, Alstad, say that again. What do you call a buck saw? He went, 36-inch Sandvakian buck saw. And I grew up using a buck saw with Dad. I never heard Dad call it that. Now I couldn't wait to get home to get on the internet and say, what is he talking about? And sure enough, that's what the actual meaning of the buck saw is. So thanks to Alstad and many yarns that we had, I'll never forget him because of that. Transporting the logs to the mill. Okay, we got the logs down now, they're on the ground. How do we get them to the mill site where they would be sawed? Well, most people sitting here certainly heard of that horse and bobsled. That was the most common way. Here we see a horse dragging a couple of logs on the bobsled alongside the campsite. This particular photograph here, I'm certain Jackie and Wes can recognize that this is two people, Larry Gladney on your right from the Glanville area, and on your left is Ken Churchill. But again, you can see illustrating the concept of the bobsled and the horse. Now, of course, as some of you know, they didn't have just horses, they had tractors. Now they were really moving up in the world. Here we see a caterpillar pulling some logs up a hillside. Imagine a horse trying to do that. Here we see a tractor pulling a large load of logs. Certainly would require more than one horse to pull that load. Caterpillar crossing the river. And here's another individual from the Southwest Arm area. I had a big smile on my face when I received this photograph, because that's a rarity. Here we have a guy by the name of Ariel King from St. Joseph's Within, and he used to use the tractor pulling the logs. Came across this in the newspaper, and I had a little laugh to myself. That's a Newfoundlander for you, boy. You don't want to rock, so I'm going to stand on the logs and balance myself, and off I go. Now, I had to get used to this term. I said a truck, they say a lorry. So, always over there, they would have said, well, that's a lorry. Here we see a lorry being loaded with logs. Another lorry being filled with logs carried to the mill site. This particular photograph, I believe we have a relative of this gentleman. This is Alexander Lambert that was driving this particular truck. Once the logs were by the riverside, they were dumped into the river, and then the river played its role in transporting the logs to the mill site. The river, once they floated down the river to the mill site, you see the PV pole being used again as they line up the logs to be taken up the conveyor belt. They're conveyed into the mill. So there's the raw product, cut by Newfoundlanders, going in, product comes out. Here she is, sawed lumber, usually used in the coal mines to get crops, but they were used for all sorts of other material. Stacking lumber. Of course, you couldn't just have it all fall out on that chute. You had to have a guy who looked at it, judged, okay, that's a good piece, I'll throw that aside, and he was responsible for stacking. Now, once they were all stacked and ready to go to whatever coal mine, wherever they were destined, they were loaded, and I apologize, my apologies, slabs. One of the byproducts is slabs from the logs, and I know there's a lot of men here who'd love to have these for split stone. You can see the abundance of it. Now, the products are being transported to the various sites, and here we see a small caboose type thing, small engine, pulling some of the logs to the particular areas to be transported elsewhere. So that's what our boys did. In addition to that, you would have had foremen and planners. They had to assess the forest and say, okay, what can we get from this? Which ones do we cut? How do we cut that one up? That type of thing. And here we see the planners, as I call them. These were assessing the value and what could be gotten from it. And in the background is a gentleman from here by the name of Silas Boone. Found this in the newspaper in Britain, talking about the Newfoundlanders. And here's the role they played. Number 1, chop her down. Number 2, illustrating the act. Number 3, TV pole. Then number 4, in the mill site, sawed into pit top lumber. And then from there, you have a scaler that's looking at the top. Okay, what else can I get from this particular log, and so on. Now, it was spoken about contract. Remember I showed you the contract at the beginning? When you signed that one, you signed on for 6 months. So at the end of the 6th month, you had decisions to make. You could say, I got enough of Scotland, I'm going home. You could say, well, I'm going to renew and stay here in Scotland, the money is fair, I enjoy here, probably got a girlfriend on the side, if you know what I mean. So these people were involved with the community and that, and they said, yeah, I'm going to renew. Then we had other boys who said, well, I got enough of the forestry, I'm heading for the Navy. or I'm heading to the Air Force, and so on. The boys that came home, just to illustrate this point, I should comment here, a person that I've got to know through email in Scotland by the name of Susan Strang. She's told me to refer to her mostly as a friend. She's been extremely helpful in putting a lot of this together. She helped supply some of the ship's manifests. Couldn't even find them at the rooms. Imagine, I couldn't get them here in Newfoundland, but consult someone in Scotland and so on, and they could assist me in getting this. So on September the 1st, Antonia came here to Newfoundland, and on board, even though I know people in the back can't read it, are several of the boys who went over the first 6 months and didn't say, no, I got enough of this, I'm going home. So here's the proof that they came home. The Dutchman's of Richmond, the manifest for that ship, shows that these loggers came home. So within a year, a number of these have returned. Now, I want you to look at this one quickly from the point of view. It illustrates the last person to leave Newfoundland to go overseas was Henry Green from St. John's Peddle. He went over and stayed about 1 year, and he returned. There's a picture of Henry Green, and he went over on this particular boat, the Mendoza. So that was the last boat that carried people from our area overseas, 1941. And one of the things a number of you here are probably holding on to your dad, your granddad, is this piece of paper that certifies your service. Okay, and there's a piece of paper that Henry's son showed me and said, okay, this is Dad's service. And Insurance Roger certainly knows Dover, and Henry went and lived in Dover when he returned and so on. Now, I just want to comment on this one. This is John Peddle. John Peddle went over and returned, but he returned under different circumstances. He had to return because his wife had lost her son, Willis Grover, and also she had lost her first husband in the First World War. She also had 3 small children. I believe 1 or 2 of them might be here today. So he felt, no, I needed more at home. So he returned home. Here's John Peddle. He left for Botwood in 1940, and he returned in 1942. Again, illustrating not all men went over and stayed over for a long period of time. Others joined the Air Force. I apologize, Armed Forces. Here we go. Some of the forces. Air Force. Some of you sitting here might know this gentleman. This is Leander Drodge in his younger days when he joined the Air Force. The artillery. This is Fred Stobridge from Buttercove. And with the Royal Navy, just to illustrate, this gentleman joined the Royal Navy, Isaiah Stringer, but unfortunately, this cost him his life. He was lost at sea and sunk on one of the vessels. Now, I want to comment a little bit about the Home Guard. I'm going to have to get some water before I dry up there. By the way, no talking in the back. Oh, that's my teaching days, though. Okay, the Home Guard. Some of you are aware of the fact that these loggers were asked in 1942 if they would volunteer, notice the word, volunteer for service in the Home Guard. Some of our boys here in this area did so, but you got to remember now, they were ready to say, okay, I'll volunteer. That means I lost my free time. On Saturday, instead of getting ready to go out for entertainment, I got to go train as a soldier. So I want you to keep that in mind. Volunteers, the Home Guard. Here's the 17 names that I've confirmed so far to list in that these were the men that joined the Home Guard. Originally I had 19, But when I started figuring out some of the dates, there's no way they were in the home guard because they were at home. So they could not have enlisted, even though they showed up on the list. Here you see Graham Peddle on your left, Max Peddle on the right, illustrating the uniform of the home guard. In this particular photograph, sent to me by Glennis again, we see Jack Goodyear and Lester Stoyles. Lester Stoyles was from the Hillview area. Again, well dressed up, showing the uniform of the home guard. And Ivan Shea standing there. Now, what did the boys do in their free time? Well, they got aboard a lorry and off to the Scottish Highlands we went, and to train as a soldier. What did they learn? Well, they learned how to communicate. So communications was part of it. They learned how to read a map, because after all, they wanted to know where you're going. That was I spent, by the way, 4 summers working with the federal government at geology. And when I used to come home, my dad used to be worried. And I'd say, "What's wrong, Dad?" He said, "How do you know where the paths are?" And of course, he didn't realize that we used maps and aerial photographs and so on. They were trained as soldiers to properly use a gun and how to take commands from the commanding officer. So that's what they did in their so-called free time, while their buddies were hanging out somewhere else. These photographs are courtesy of a guy by the name of Bill Nicholas. I just basically took them and colored them, again showing you the beautiful Scottish countryside. Entertainment. The boys that weren't caught up who went to the home guard were looking for entertainment, and I wanted to go down to probably the second last sentence where it says they're fond of dancing and amusements. They have been in attendance in large numbers. So the Newfoundlanders loved a good time. They sought it out on the free time that they would have. This building here, some of you might recognize it, heard of it, the Spa Pavilion. Think of it as the nightclub. This is where everybody hung out. The Americans, the British, and the Newfoundlanders. Dare say there was a scattered racket there. This is located in Stratford, Scotland, so near where the campsites were too. Some of you might recognize these three individuals. We have on the far left is James Drover, on the far right, Albert Drover, and in the center is, I believe, James' son, Chester. Now, one of the reasons I want to mention Jim and Albert, these guys, believe it or not, they were in the First World War. So they were sailors, and then all of a sudden, they became lumberjacks and went overseas. This particular photograph here shows James Chalk. And again, notice the building, notice the background. This is the background as it was at that time in the Spa Pavilion. Notice the dress. Okay, boys are there for entertainment. They're dressed up a bit compared to what they would normally worn at that time in the workplace. Other forms of entertainment. Here we have 2 people from our area, one by the name of Max Pinson on your left, and on your right, Leslie Stoyles. You see these people playing the guitar, so that was a form of entertainment. Found this in the British newspaper about Newfoundlanders gathering around the bunk and singing a few songs before they blew up the lamps. Boxing? Well, boxing was a favorite pastime, and here we see James Drover illustrating how he boxed. Now, you might think, oh yeah, that's just for a photograph. No, some of these guys were serious because camps would challenge each other in boxing bouts. So that was a form of entertainment. Here you can see a boxing bout, and look in the background and you see the government officials standing here watching the boxing. So it was a form of entertainment. Now, I want to comment on the women that married a lot of the loggers in this area. This particular book here, one of the few out there, that has been put together by a group, and their stories from the Scottish brides, the British brides. Again, a great book to read some of the stories. What was it like for these people to leave Scotland and arrive in a little tiny outport after growing up in a city? And some of you certainly know some of these stories more than I do, even though I would love to know them all. And this is the back cover, so if you're ever looking for a book to read on the brides, that's certainly the one I would recommend, because there are only a few out there. Now, this particular beautiful looking lady is Trixie Stoyles. Her name is actually Alexandria, but they call her Trixie. And Trixie has a story in there, and I'll just highlight a latter part of the first paragraph, how she talked about the fact she came across the Atlantic nice and calm and everything was good, but when she got on the boat to come across the straits, it was a storm, and she got violently sick. And she said because of that, she'd never, ever forget coming from Scotland. Now, this particular chart here I put together based upon various marriage certificates, talking to families, and this confirms that there was 13 women who married loggers, Newfoundland Forestry. I'm not talking about the Navy, because I know there's people that marry Navy people too, but the loggers. These guys went over with the logging. Sometimes their weddings got into British newspapers. And this is a guy that got married, Stephen Walsh. And here's his picture in the British newspaper. Sometimes I didn't find articles, and I didn't get family members to tell me this, but we were fortunate enough to identify marriage registration. And here it confirms that an Herbert Green, also known as Without, married a Margaret Stewart. So various ways that we got this information over a period of time. Now, we were fortunate that some family members said, oh, I got a picture of mom and dad when they were married. So the first one, Art Dean, and his son is here with us today, and his mom, Agnes. In the next one, Doug Cooper and Elizabeth Banks. And the last one at the bottom there, Leander Dodge and Catherine. So again, great to have these historical photographs and that to document the history of this region. This particular wedding here of Lester Stoyles and Trixie. What's interesting about this one, and I asked Glennis before I spoke here today, could I have permission to sort of sum up what happened in their marriage? So I'm going to try to do that as quickly as I can. Okay, Lester Stoyles goes overseas, hangs out in Scotland in the area, eventually meeting this girl's sister. Started going with her. Her sister's a little bit younger, and eventually, obviously, she gets a bit older, and she goes to work in clerk in the area that Lester is working in, gets to know her a little bit. Suddenly the war is about to be over. He looks at her and says, what are we going to do? I'm going back to Newfoundland. What do you want to do? Oh, we'll get married. And most people say, oh, that's a pretty good story. But that wasn't over, because he got ready to come home, and her dad looked at it, she's not going. What do you mean she's not going? We're married. She's coming. No. I'm telling you now, what you have to do is go back to Newfoundland, find a job. When you find a job, send me confirmation that you have a job, then I'll let her come home. That's what happened. Now, he got a job in Gander, she came to Gander, and then from there they raised her family. And again, thank you, Glennis, for helping me understand this story. Now, the ATS, Bob referred to the fact that they were advertising for books, clerks, and basically anything. They want the women to join up and help out. The ATS, or the Auxiliary Territorial Service, in our area, we have this lady, Catherine Fieldhouse, who became Catherine Dodge, more commonly called Kitty. We have this lady, Mary Stoker All, who became Mary Peddle. And in the center here, we have Doris Harford, who became Doris Peddle. Now, I thought I had my research done pretty good there. And remember, I showed you a certificate a little bit earlier of the marriage between Herbert Green and Martha Stewart. When I was viewing it last week, discovered she was also in the ATS. So now I have to revise some of this. Of course, there was 4 ladies from the ATS that married people from this area. One of the reasons I didn't know as much about Herbert Green is that when he came here first with his bride, they went back to New York, and it was difficult to find a person who would be able to tell me all the information. Now, war is over. Boys got ready to leave England and Scotland, and here we had them arriving in St. John's. 70 foresters arrived on this particular ship. On board that ship, we had 2 individuals from this area with their families. We had Robert Cooper and Leonard Peddle. So again, proving that these people came over after the war with their families. Here's a photograph, actually, of the men and families coming down the gangplank in St. John's Harbor. Now, the manifest of other ships and so on helps me determine when did the other women come over. Sometimes they came over with their husband, sometimes they came over on boats alone. And this is, again, documentation showing you which boats they would have come over on. Now, I want to speak to, so I think of this term sometimes, the last one. This is the last one in reference to returning from overseas. He returned on the SS Lady Rodney, and I've got to give the room's credit here, because it was the room where I found this documentation that the ship's manifest, one of the few ship's manifest they got, and I put an arrow by the name, George Churchill. This documents that George Churchill was actually the last person to return home, whereas the first 4 individuals I showed you were the first to leave this area. And there's a photo of George Churchill in his younger days. Now, documents, medals, and badges. Every man that served with the forestry would have been given one of these, so some of you would have seen your dads, granddads, uncles, so on. Those that served in the Home Guard, they would have been given that piece of paper certifying that they served with the Home Guard. Badges? Well, those that served with the Home Guard were entitled to the Defense Medal. Also, those that would have been entitled to the Volunteer Medal, and all loggers were entitled to that one. But notice that Bob said, upon application. And believe it or not, there's still people in the Southwest Arm that still, the families don't have that medal. They don't realize it. You've got to ask for it. You've got to file application. I wanted to speak briefly about this gentleman. This is Noah Bishop from Atchicole, and I've been talking back and forth with his daughter-in-law for probably almost a year now. She initially contacted me. They were looking for Noah Bishop's medal. He had never applied for them, and now he had a granddaughter in Australia that wanted to participate in the parade. She was told, it would be nice to have your granddad's medal. But of course the family didn't have it. So she contacted me saying, how do we go about getting dad's medals? Now, I'm no expert, I don't know nothing. But I said, okay, I'll see what we can do and work it out. She applied, and guys, see these shiny medals? Brand new, issued this summer to the family, and I believe the family then forwarded them to the granddaughter. To me, that's what this is all about, helping people, helping telling their stories and so on. Oh, I should mention, she also contacted me the latter part of summer. She said, I think he might be entitled to something from Newfoundland. Can you find out what he might be allowed to have? So, of course, I thought of the volunteer medal. She said, well, how do I do that? Sent her the application. She emailed me recently and said, look, we just got his volunteer medal. Now that the family has a collection of his medals. The women were entitled to medals. Here we can see Doris's medals, the defense medal, and the volunteer medal. Kitty's medals. And here's a good example of 2 proud veterans wearing their medals at an event. On your left is Leander Drive, and on your right is Kitty, proudly displaying their medals. Now, I want to have you to look at the slide part that just came up, and I want you to compare the two volunteer medals. Notice that the Newfoundland one versus the British one. They're slightly different. So if you look at the Kitty medals, you'll see that she has the British one, whereas Leander would be here the Newfoundland. Now, I'm going to speak briefly about the badge that the lumberjacks were given to help them be identified. I'm wearing one today, a copy of one, and there are several people here in the audience that are wearing them. The badges look like this. They were minted for about 2,200 loggers at the time. But as Bob commented about the fact that there was roughly 3,600 or more, they had to do a second minting of the badge. The ATS, they were given this particular badge and this particular pin. Now, I want to quickly show you a couple of pictures of the men proudly displaying the badge. Ernest Avery, Kenneth Churchill, George Butt, Caleb Churchill, John Peddle, Walter Churchill, and Jonathan Gregory. So again, see the importance. Now they had a sense of identity. This badge allowed them to be identified as service people from Newfoundland. Most of you are aware that November the 11th is coming up. This is the symbol to represent World War II and that. This statement is often used, least we forget, and I challenge anyone here today to remember the 4 people who enlisted with the forestry and did not return. We had William Miller, we had William Bay, we had Isaiah Stringer, and Willis Thrower. Oh, yeah, I'm a teacher. I'll play. Are you guys ready? I've got to tell you to take notes, so boy, you guys are in trouble now. Here we go. Who was the last logger to return home to the Southwest Arm area? Now, of course, I always gave multiple choice. Don't say what the answer yet. We have Caleb Churchill. We have Henry Green. We have George Churchill and Noah Bishop. And the answer is? You're correct. Beautiful with technology, isn't it? Okay, one more. There we go. The largest contingent of loggers to go overseas traveled on which ship? Was it Troby? Was it the Duchess of Richmond? Was it the Antonia? Or was it the Newfoundland? And the answer is Troby, right? Here we go. Now, for some of you, show that you pay attention, but some of you, boy, you've got a lot to learn here. Now, I want to finish up with this slide. Please bear with me. This is a family, and I want you to concentrate on this little boy. Born in central Newfoundland, grows up to be a man, ends up in the forest. Here he is. Because of his experience, I'm going to enlist and go overseas. Goes overseas, the contact that I have in Scotland sends me this photograph. Can you help me with this? He didn't come back. Why? What is the story? Guys, look at the headline. Lowertown youth meets tragic death, shot by sentry. He was in fact the only one that ended up getting killed with the force. They were going into town for a night of entertainment. He's sitting in the back of a lorry. They go through a checkpoint. The 2 guards halt asked them to halt, but of course you can't hear with 7 or 8 men with a few drinks in, if you know what I mean. They go on, puts up the gun, fires, and the gentleman ends up dying. This gentleman, by the way, was from Florida. I want you to think about this. Everyone's got a story. It's just up to you to tell it. And if any of you have got stories about your dad, your mom, and so on, related to the forestry net, I'm always got my ears open, ready to record the story. Thank you very much.